Following the Covenant's invasion of the planet Reach in August of 2552, the UNSC Pillar of Autumn staged a narrow escape to an uncharted location within the Milky Way galaxy, and this destination would turn out to be none other than the ancient forerunner Halo Installation 04. Yet the wonder behind this massive ring would be cut short, as their vessel had been followed by Supreme Commander Thalvadami and his fleet of particular justice. Among those who served amongst its ranks was Special Operations Officer Zuka Zamamee, who would go on to be one of the key individuals leading the raid on this ship. After breaking through the ship's hull, Zamamee and Covenant boarding parties were met with heavy resistance from the UNSC. And unaware to the presence of a Spartan, the initial troops were blindsided by the Master Chief, who had completely decimated their forces, Zamamee himself having suffered a near-fatal shot to the head. Having quickly fled the scene, UNSC forces hadn't realized that Zamamee survived this encounter, and luckily for him, his groans of pain would eventually alert a passing unit of Ungoi led by Yayep and Gagaw. When confronted with the wounded officer, the two debated on what exactly they should do, but after realizing his rescue might allow them to escape the battle unharmed, seized the opportunity. They then fled the ship with Zamamee in tow. After recovering from his injury, Zamamee realized the loss of his Ungoi assistant, as they had perished during the attack. But impressed with the quick thinking and dedication to the safety of a superior officer, informed Yayep that he would take their place. The two then immediately began scheming as to how they would hunt down the demon and restore his honor. But before that, he would first have to travel to the Council of Masters aboard the Truth and Reconciliation, where he would try to convince them that they must hunt down the Spartan to prevent further catastrophe. To his dismay, they felt his fears were merely the symptom of battle-induced hysteria. While his concerns were initially dismissed by his superior Soha Rolami, the minor prophet of stewardship, and the other members of the council, their attitude quickly changed after the ship fell under attack, with the Master Chief having neutralized an alarming number of their forces, freed a number of imprisoned humans, and hijacked one of their spirit dropships. So, with this newfound understanding of the severity of the situation, Zamamee was recalled and granted permission to carry out the assassination of this Spartan, and his plan would be simple: stage a trap. Having come to the conclusion that the Covenant BattleNet had become compromised, he sought to use that to his advantage. He would go on leaving numerous references to an ancient Forerunner map room, better known as a cartographer, as he anticipated that the Master Chief would designate it as his next target. Here he would deploy a pair of Megalith Golo and a lance of Ungoi, who would operate under the command of Yayep. In due time, the UNSC did indeed take the bait, and they would stage an assault on the island housing the structure. Everything was going to plan, or at least it seemed it was, until one of the hunters carelessly charged past Zamamee and knocked him to the floor. And to make matters worse, due to the misfiring of an overcharged plasma shot by one of the Ungoi, one of the Megalith Golo were killed by mistake, allowing the Master Chief to easily dispatch the other hunter and the remainder of the team. Yayep and Zamamee feared for the worst and fled the encounter, only having survived by hiding inside of a cargo pod. The two would eventually escape the island, but after Zamamee returned to his superiors once again, he was given one final warning by the Prophet of Stewardship, and to emphasize the consequences of yet another failure, he was shown the decapitated head of Solo Rolami, who himself had failed to prevent the spread of a flood outbreak down on the Halo. It was then reiterated to Zamamee that should he fail again at killing this demon, he would suffer the same fate. In their next attempt, Zamamee would need to infiltrate the UNSC's main center of operations, Alpha Base. And to do this, rather than a trap, this time they would stage a scene that appeared as though a ghost had crashed and been destroyed, with its injured pilot being Yayep, who they would purposefully allow to be captured by humans and taken back to their base. That way, utilizing a beacon hidden within his armor, the Ungoi would be able to signal once the Master Chief arrived. And to make the scene believable, Yayep was beaten and hidden among the debris of the crash. Eventually, he was indeed discovered by UNSC forces, captured, and then promptly brought to Alpha Base. Sometime after his imprisonment, Yayep did eventually encounter the Master Chief. He then signaled to his comrades, but it would be some time before they began their mission. Utilizing a hijacked Pelican from an earlier battle, Zamamee would force a captured UNSC pilot to request clearance to land so that he and a few other Special Operations Sangheili could infiltrate the base. The majority would work to secure as many landing pads as possible for further reinforcements, while he and a small team would work their way through the base and locate the Master Chief. Having killed nearly every human in their way, the team was ultimately unsuccessful in finding their target. However, they did eventually stumble upon Yayap. After freeing him, Zamamee instructed the grunt to point them in the direction of the Spartan, but Yayap had other plans. Fearing that the assault was going to fail, he convinced Zamamee that the Master Chief was off guarding a collection of stolen banshees. While Zamamee believed this, in reality, John 117 was currently occupied with battling the flood infestation elsewhere on the ring. On their way to the Banshees, they were met with heavy resistance from Marines, resulting in the death of the entire squad except for Yayap and Zamamee himself. But they did indeed make it to the Banshees, and to Zamamee's surprise, the Master Chief was nowhere to be seen. After realizing this was all a ruse, he was furious and turned to threaten the Ungoy. But to his surprise once again, Yayap had pulled out a plasma pistol and threatened him to pilot a Banshee, so that they could escape the base. Realizing that the assault was quickly falling apart, Zamamee agreed with his position, and the two fled. Realizing he could not return to Covenant leadership yet again, Yayap suggested that Zamamee avoid punishment by traveling to the crash site of the UNSC Pillar of Autumn. Here, Covenant forces had established a base of operations, and it would prove the perfect place for him to blend in. He would need only assume the identity of a dead Sangheili soldier, performing their tasks, and then await the arrival of the Master Chief. Zamamee agreed that this would be the best course of action and took on the identity of Huki Umami, one of the many commandos who had served under him during the assault on Alpha Base. Overworked and understaffed, the leader of operations, simply known as Ontami, was more than pleased to have a special operations member under his command, and asking no questions, granted him the immediate charge of 20 Kigyar troops. Hoping to not gain any more attention than necessary, Zamamee delegated all of his leadership responsibilities to Yayap, and instead chose to lay low. That is, all but for one day after his arrival, when his superior had announced that the Master Chief had infiltrated the crashed human vessel. Zamamee jumped at the opportunity and volunteered himself to hunt down the demon. Without hesitation, Ontami assigned him to the task and allowed him access to whatever he needed. For this third attempt at ending the Master Chief, Zamamee would task Yayap with feeding him the real-time location of the Spartan. Once John 117 had detonated the fusion reactors aboard the ship, Yayap had determined that the perfect location for their final ambush would take place aboard an elevator connected to his current path off the ship. So, armed with a plasma rifle, shade turret, and several troops, he waited. It was not long before he was finally face to face with the Master Chief once again, and this time he was nearly successful with firing off a few plasma bolts, but missed him entirely. Just then, the Spartan's artificial intelligence would disable the elevator and send it hurtling towards the bottom of the shaft. Then, utilizing 2 fragmentation grenades, the Master Chief destroyed the shade turret, causing it to explode. This sent Zamamee flying into the wall, breaking his spine and paralyzing him. And almost as though he were completely unaffected by this encounter, the Master Chief quickly fled the scene. Now, while he had ultimately failed at completing his mission, Zamamee would at least die in combat. Even though the Master Chief had indeed bested him on so many occasions, at least he would die at the hands of such a legendary warrior. So, taking his last breath, he was finally at peace, and it took only a few moments before the ship's reactor blew, and he drifted away to paradise. As always, I just want to say thank you so much for watching, and if you could, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Especially if you want to see more Halo lore, shorts, videos, you name it. But hey, that's all for now, so I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.